There are men who build empires with their bare hands, and then there are men who inherit them and make them even larger, colder, more impenetrable. Julian Hargrove belonged to the second kind. He was 42 years old, though his face seemed frozen somewhere between 35 and eternity. His eyes were the color of steel in winter, and his presence had the weight of a silent verdict. When he walked into a room, conversations died mid-sentence. Not out of fear exactly, but out of something more primal, something that recognized authority without needing to understand it. Julian did not shake hands. He did not embrace. He did not kiss cheeks or pat shoulders, or engage in any of the small physical rituals that lubricate human interaction. For nearly 2 decades, he had maintained a strict perimeter around his body, a border no one dared to cross. His assistants knew to keep their distance. His lawyers communicated through documents. Even his tailor took measurements from photographs and previous records, never laying a hand on him. The tower where he lived and worked stood in the heart of Manhattan, a monolith of glass and steel that reflected the sky but revealed nothing of what happened inside. The Hargrove Foundation occupied the top 12 floors, a labyrinth of mahogany offices, silent hallways, and rooms filled with artifacts that told the story of a family whose wealth stretched back 5 generations. Old money, people called it, the kind that didn't need to announce itself because everyone already knew. But what people didn't know, what they couldn't see behind the polished marble and the charitable galas and the perfectly orchestrated press releases, was that the Hargrove fortune was built on silence, on secrets locked in filing cabinets that never saw daylight, on agreements signed in the dark hours of night, witnessed only by lawyers who knew when to look away. And Julian, the last true Hargrove, was the keeper of all those secrets. He woke every morning at 5:30. His apartment, which occupied the entire top floor of the tower, was a study in minimalism. White walls, black furniture, surfaces so clean they looked like they had never been touched, which in a way they hadn't. Julian moved through his space like a ghost, leaving no trace of his presence. He showered in water so hot it turned his skin red, as if trying to scald away something invisible. He dressed in suits that cost more than most people earned in a month, each piece perfectly tailored to hang on his body without clinging, without demanding contact. His breakfast was always the same: black coffee, 2 slices of whole grain toast, an apple cut into precise eighths. He ate alone at a table that could seat 12, looking out at the city waking below him. From this height, people were just moving dots, and that distance comforted him. The world was manageable when you didn't have to touch it. By 7, he was in his office. By 7:15, his assistant Margaret, a woman in her 60s who had worked for his father before him, would leave the day's schedule on his desk. She never handed it to him. She never lingered. She understood the rules without needing them explained. Today, the schedule showed what it always showed: meetings with financial advisors, calls with international partners, a review session with the foundation's legal team. Everything predictable, everything controlled. Julian lived inside a clockwork universe of his own design, and he intended to keep it that way. But then Margaret's voice came through the intercom, and there was something in her tone that made Julian's hand pause over the document he was reading. "Mr. Hargrove, there is someone here to see you." "She does not have an appointment." Julian's jaw tightened. He did not see people without appointments, ever. Tell her to schedule through the proper channels. There was a pause. Julian could hear Margaret breathing, could sense her hesitation. "Sir, she says she has a letter. From your father, from before he passed." The air in the office seemed to shift, to grow heavier. Julian's father had been dead for 7 years. 7 years of carefully managed silence, of files sealed and doors locked and chapters closed. There should be no letters. There should be nothing left. Send her up. He said it before he could think better of it and immediately regretted the impulse. But it was too late. Margaret had already disconnected. Julian stood and walked to the window. The city stretched out before him, indifferent and infinite. He pressed his palm against the cold glass, needing the shock of temperature to ground him. His heart was beating faster than it should, and he hated that. Hated that some unknown woman with an alleged letter could disrupt the careful equilibrium he had spent years constructing. The knock on his door was soft but firm. "Come in." She entered, and Julian's first thought was that she looked nothing like what he had expected. He had imagined someone older, desperate, wearing the shabbiness of someone who had come to beg. But this woman was young, perhaps 30, with dark hair that fell past her shoulders and eyes that held the kind of brightness that comes only from having survived something terrible and refused to be destroyed by it. She wore a simple dress, dark blue, nothing expensive but chosen with care. And she moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly why she was there. Mr. Hargrove. Her voice was steady, melodic almost, but with an edge underneath, like velvet wrapped around a blade. Julian did not move from the window. He studied her reflection in the glass, keeping his distance. "You have 1 minute to tell me why you are here." She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "My name is Elena Cortez, and I am here to claim what was stolen from my mother 26 years ago." She reached into her bag, a worn leather thing that looked like it had traveled many miles, and pulled out an envelope. Old paper, yellowed at the edges, sealed with wax that had cracked with age. She held it up, and even from across the room Julian could see the Hargrove family crest stamped into that seal. "This is a letter from your father to my mother, Victoria Cortez. In it he acknowledges a trust fund established for her and any children she might have. A trust worth $47 million. A trust that has been blocked, hidden, and denied for more than 2 decades. Julian turned slowly to face her. His expression gave nothing away, but inside something old and buried was beginning to stir. "My father established many trusts. The foundation manages hundreds of them. If you believe you have a legitimate claim, you can file the appropriate paperwork with our legal department." Elena took a step forward, and Julian's entire body tensed. "I have filed paperwork. For 3 years. And every time I am told the same thing. There is no record. The trust does not exist. But I have this letter, Mr. Hargrove. I have bank statements from 1998. I have photographs of your father with my mother. And I have a birth certificate that lists my mother as the named beneficiary of a Hargrove family trust, signed by your father himself." She placed the envelope on the edge of his desk, careful not to come any closer. Julian stared at it as if it were a live grenade. "My mother died believing she had failed me. She spent her last years working 3 jobs, trying to give me an education, trying to keep us alive. She never understood why the money stopped coming, why the letters were returned, why the lawyers stopped calling. But I understand, Mr. Hargrove. I understand perfectly. Because your family decided she was not worthy anymore. They decided her child me was not worthy, and they buried the evidence so deep they thought no one would ever find it." Julian's hands were clenched at his sides, hidden in his pockets. He could feel the familiar wave trying to rise inside him, the thing he had learned to suppress years ago. Anger, panic, the urge to make this woman disappear, to erase this moment, to return to the safety of his controlled world. But Elena was not done. "I smell like jasmine, Mr. Hargrove. My mother used to wear it. She said it was the scent of home, of the place she came from before she met your father, before he made her promises he never intended to keep. I wear it now because it reminds me of her strength, of her dignity, and I am here to finish what she started." Julian finally moved. He walked to his desk, slow and deliberate, and picked up the envelope without opening it. He could feel the weight of it, the realness of it. "If what you say is true," he said quietly, "then you will need to prove it. And that will take time. Legal processes, investigations." Elena met his gaze without flinching. "I am not going anywhere, Mr. Hargrove. I have waited my entire life for this. I can wait a little longer." There was a long silence. Julian could hear his own breathing, could feel the walls of his office closing in. He had spent years making sure nothing and no one could penetrate his fortress. And now this woman, with her jasmine scent and her righteous fury, had walked right through the front door. "I will make you a proposal," he heard himself say, and even as the words left his mouth, he knew they were a mistake. But he could not stop. "Miss Cortez, 90 days. You will live here in this building, with full access to the Foundation's records. You will have an office, resources, whatever you need to prove your claim. But you will do it under my supervision. You will report your findings to me, and at the end of 90 days we will know the truth." Elena's eyes narrowed. "Why would you offer me that?" "Because," Julian said, and his voice was colder now, harder, If you are telling the truth, then someone in this organization has been lying to me, and I do not tolerate lies. If you are not telling the truth, then I want to know who sent you and why. Either way, I want answers. And I want them contained, here where I can see them. Elena considered this for a long moment. Then she nodded. 90 days. But I want it in writing, and I want access to everything. No locked doors. No sealed files. Julian almost smiled. Almost. You will have access to what I determine is relevant. This is my building, Miss Cortez. My foundation. My rules. Then we have an understanding. She extended her hand across the desk, an automatic gesture, a polite closing to a negotiation. But Julian did not take it. He looked at her outstretched hand as if it were a foreign object, something dangerous and unpredictable. And Elena, watching his face, slowly withdrew her hand, realization dawning in her eyes. You do not touch people, she said softly. It was not a question. Julian's expression remained neutral, but something flickered behind his eyes, something that might have been shame or anger or both. Margaret will show you to your quarters. You can begin tomorrow morning. 9 sharp. He turned away, dismissing her, and walked back to the window. He could feel her standing there, could sense her trying to understand what she had just witnessed. Then he heard her footsteps, the soft click of the door closing, and she was gone. Julian pressed his forehead against the glass. The city below was oblivious, rushing through its endless cycles of ambition and failure, love and loss. And here he was, 42 years old, standing in a tower he owned but did not inhabit, about to spend 90 days with a woman who had just shattered his carefully constructed peace. He thought about his father, about the man who had built this empire on charm and handshakes, and the kind of easy physical confidence Julian had never possessed. His father, who could hug a stranger and make them feel like family. His father, who had died in this very office alone because in the end, none of those touches had meant anything real. Julian had been 23 when it happened, when the thing that made him stop touching people occurred. He did not think about it often, had trained himself not to go back to that night, to that moment when his world inverted, and he understood that contact was not connection, that skin against skin could be the most violent thing in the world. But now, with Elena Cortez in his building, with her jasmine scent probably already seeping into the hallways, with her questions and her letter and her terrible, relentless hope, he could feel the past pushing against the present, demanding to be remembered. He stayed at the window until the sun began to set, watching the city turn from gold to grey to black, and he did not move when Margaret knocked softly to tell him she was leaving for the day. He did not respond when his phone buzzed with messages he would not read. He simply stood there, a man who owned everything and touched nothing, and wondered what he had just set in motion. 90 days. It had seemed like nothing when he said it, a manageable span of time, a finite experiment. But now, as the darkness settled over the city and the tower grew quiet around him, 90 days felt like an eternity. Or worse, like not nearly enough time at all. Elena Cortez was given a suite on the 40th floor, just below the Foundation's main offices, but far above the city's noise. The apartment was beautiful in that sterile, expensive way that hotels achieve when they spend too much money trying to feel like home and end up feeling like nowhere. Grey walls, white furniture, abstract art that meant nothing. But the windows were magnificent. They stretched from floor to ceiling, offering a view of Manhattan that made Elena's breath catch despite herself. She stood there as the sun disappeared, watching the city light up building by building, and thought about her mother, about how Victoria Cortez had worked as a housekeeper in buildings like this one, scrubbing floors that looked out on views she would never afford, about how she had loved a man who lived in towers while she lived in walk-ups with broken elevators, about how that love had been real for her, even if it had been convenient for him. Eleanor had been 7 years old when the money stopped. She remembered the morning her mother had opened the bank statement and gone very still, very quiet. She remembered watching her mother make phone calls, her voice getting smaller with each rejection, each lawyer who suddenly could not return her messages. She remembered the way hope drained out of her mother's face year by year, until all that was left was tired determination and a kind of dignity that poverty could not erase. When Victoria died, 3 years ago, she left Elena almost nothing. A box of photographs, Some letters, all unopened, all returned to sender. And one document, the trust agreement, with the Hargrove family seal embossed at the top and her mother's name written in elegant script as the beneficiary. Elena had spent those 3 years becoming someone who could walk into Julian Hargrove's office without trembling. She had worked multiple jobs, saved every penny, taught herself contract law in public libraries, and tracked down every piece of evidence she could find. And when she finally had enough, when she finally felt ready, she had bought a single good dress, the dark blue one she was wearing now, and made her way to the tower. She had expected resistance. She had expected lawyers, delays, closed doors. What she had not expected was Julian Hargrove himself. The way he stood so rigidly, as if his body were a prison he was constantly guarding. The way he looked at her extended hand as if she had offered him poison. The way his voice remained perfectly controlled, while his eyes betrayed something raw and wounded underneath. He was not what she had imagined. She had pictured a villain, someone cold and calculating, someone who would smile while denying her. But Julian Hargrove did not smile. And his coldness seemed less like cruelty and more like armor, like something he wore to protect himself from a world he did not trust. Elena turned away from the window and began to unpack her small suitcase. She had brought so little: a few changes of clothes, her mother's letters, the documents that proved her claim, and a photograph, her favorite, of her mother at 23, laughing at something off camera, looking happy in a way Elena had never seen her look in real life. She placed the photograph on the nightstand and touched her mother's face gently. "I am here, Mama. I made it. Now I just have to prove it." There was a soft knock at her door. Elena opened it to find a young man in his 20s, well-dressed with kind eyes and a professional smile. "Miss Cortez, I am David, Mr. Hargrove's assistant." "Well, one of them. He asked me to bring you these." He handed her a folder and a key card. The folder contains your access credentials, a map of the Foundation's offices, and the protocols for using the archive. The key card will get you into any floor below 65. Mr. Hargrove's private floors are restricted, but everything else is available to you. Elena took the items, surprised by how quickly this was moving. "Thank you, David. Can I ask you something?" "Of course. What is he like?" "Mr. Hargrove. To work for." David hesitated, clearly weighing how honest to be. He is fair, demanding but fair. He does not waste time on pleasantries, but he respects competence. And he keeps his word. If he told you that you would have access, you will have access. Elena nodded. That aligned with her first impression. And the not touching thing. Is that something everyone here knows about? David's expression became more guarded. Mr. Hargrove values his personal space. We all respect that. It has never been an issue. It was a non-answer, but Elena understood. Whatever Julian Hargrove's reasons were, they were not something his staff discussed. "Thank you. David, I appreciate your help." He nodded and left. And Elena was alone again with her view and her memories, and the strange, unsettling sense that she had just crossed a threshold she could not uncross. She spent the rest of the evening reviewing the documents in the folder, familiarizing herself with the Foundation's structure, the names of key personnel, the location of the archives. It was all very thorough, very professional, and yet she could not shake the feeling that she was being watched, evaluated, measured against some standard she did not understand. At midnight, unable to sleep, Elena put on her coat and decided to explore. The keycard worked as promised, granting her access to the elevators and the lower floors. The building was mostly empty at this hour, just a few security guards making their rounds. She wandered through the Foundation's public spaces, the gallery with its portraits of past Hargroves, the library with its first edition collections, the conference rooms with their leather chairs and mahogany tables. Everything was perfect. Everything was preserved. It was like walking through a museum dedicated to a family that had turned itself into an institution, carefully curating which parts of its history to display and which to hide. Elena found herself in front of a portrait of Julian's father, Robert Hargrove. He was handsome in that patrician way, with silver hair and a confident smile. He looked like a man who had never doubted himself, never questioned his place in the world. And standing next to him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, was a woman Elena did not recognize. Tall, elegant, with steel-grey eyes that reminded her uncomfortably of Julian. The plaque beneath the portrait read, "Robert Hargrove and Vivian Ashford Hargrove, founders of the Hargrove Foundation, 1985. So that was Julian's mother, or rather his stepmother. Elena had read enough about the family to know that Julian's biological mother had died when he was very young, and that Robert had remarried quickly, to Vivian, a woman from an even older, richer family. A strategic alliance dressed up as love. Elena stared at Vivian's painted face and felt a chill run through her. There was something predatory in those eyes, something that suggested this woman had gotten exactly what she wanted and would do anything to keep it. You should not be wandering alone at this hour. Elena spun around, her heart hammering. Julian stood in the shadows of the gallery, still wearing his suit from earlier, looking as if he had never left the building. Which Elena realized he probably had not. "I could not sleep," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I wanted to see the foundation, to understand it." Julian stepped into the light and Elena could see that he looked tired. Not physically tired, but something deeper, something existential. "That is my father. And Vivienne. She has been the foundation's primary trustee since he died." Elena glanced back at the portrait. "She looks formidable, she is." There was something in Julian's tone that made Elena look at him more carefully. Not affection, not exactly fear, but something complicated, something that suggested the relationship between Julian and Vivian was not as simple as stepmother and stepson. "Will I meet her?" Elena asked. "During these 90 days, Julian's jaw tightened. Inevitably, Vivian takes a personal interest in all foundation matters, especially those involving the family legacy. Elena understood the warning beneath those words. Vivian would not be pleased about her presence here. Vivian would be an obstacle. "I'm not afraid of difficult conversations." "Mr. Hargrove." Julian looked at her for a long moment, and Elena had the strangest sense that he was seeing her clearly for the first time, not as a problem to be managed or a threat to be neutralized, but as a person, a woman with her own strength, her own reasons, her own will. "I believe you," he said quietly, "but you should be afraid." Vivian did not build this foundation by being kind. She built it by being ruthless, and she does not lose. Then we will see what happens when she finally does. The words came out more defiant than Elena intended, but she did not take them back. She stood there in the gallery, surrounded by generations of Hargroves looking down from their gilded frames, and she did not look away from Julian's gaze. And something shifted between them in that moment. Some invisible line was crossed. Julian took a half-step forward, an unconscious movement, and Elena felt her breath catch. He was close enough now that she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the shadow of stubble on his jaw, the way his hands were clenched at his sides, as if he were physically restraining himself from reaching out. But he did not touch her. He stopped just short of that invisible boundary he maintained around himself, and the air between them seemed to vibrate with everything that was not being said, not being done. "You should get some rest, Miss Cortez. Tomorrow will be a long day." He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the empty gallery, and Elena was left standing alone beneath the watchful eyes of the Hargroves, her heart racing and her skin tingling as if she had just survived something dangerous. She did not know it yet, could not have known it in that moment, but the next 90 days would change everything, would break open secrets that had been sealed for decades, would force both of them to confront truths they had spent years avoiding, would ignite a fire that neither of them knew how to control or extinguish. But for now, in the deep silence of the tower at midnight, all Elena knew was that Julian Hargrove was not the man she had expected him to be, and that scared her far more than any villain ever could. The morning arrived with that particular quality of light that only Manhattan possesses, harsh and beautiful at the same time, filtering through glass and steel and turning everything gold. Elena woke at 6, disoriented for a moment by the unfamiliar luxury around her, by the silence that felt too complete, too expensive. She had spent most of her life waking to the sounds of the city at street level, to sirens and shouting, and the rumble of trucks making deliveries. But here, 40 floors up, the world was muted, distant, almost unreal. She showered quickly, dressed in simple black pants and a white blouse, clothes that said professional without trying too hard, and pulled her hair back into a neat ponytail. In the mirror, she saw her mother's eyes looking back at her, that same determined brightness, that refusal to be diminished. She touched the jasmine perfume to her wrists and neck. A ritual, a prayer, a reminder of why she was here. By 8:30, she was in the archives on the 42nd floor. A vast room lined with filing cabinets and climate-controlled storage units that held decades of foundation records. A young woman with red hair and glasses introduced herself as Patricia, the head archivist, and explained the filing system with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious texts. Everything is organized by year, then by type of transaction. Trusts, donations, investments, legal agreements. Each file has a unique identifier. You will need to fill out a request form for anything you want to examine, and I will retrieve it for you. We maintain strict protocols here. Elena nodded, understanding that these protocols were probably designed to make research as slow and difficult as possible. But she had expected that. She had 90 days. She would use every single one of them. She started with 1998, the year her mother's name appeared on the trust document she possessed. Patricia brought her box after box, each one filled with papers that smelled of old ink and older secrets. Eleanor worked methodically, scanning each document, looking for her mother's name, for any reference to Victoria Cortez or the trust fund that had supposedly been established for her. Hours passed. The morning became afternoon. Patricia brought her coffee that Elena barely touched, and a sandwich she did not taste. The archive was silent, except for the whisper of paper and the occasional hum of the climate control system. And Elena felt herself sinking into that particular trance that comes from deep research, where time loses meaning and the world contracts to just the documents in front of you and the questions driving you forward. She found nothing. Not a single mention of her mother's name. Not in 1998, not in 1997, not in 1999. It was as if Victoria Cortez had been completely erased from the Foundation's history. But Elena knew that was impossible. She had the letter. She had the bank statements showing deposits that had come from Hargrove accounts. She had proof that her mother had existed in this world, had been connected to this family, had been promised something that was then taken away, which meant the records had been scrubbed, deliberately, carefully, by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Elena sat back in her chair, frustration building in her chest like pressure behind a dam. She had expected obstacles, but not this. Not a complete absence, as if her mother had been a ghost, a fiction, something that never existed at all. You look like someone who has hit a wall. Elena looked up to find Julian standing in the doorway of the archive. He had changed from his suit into dark jeans and a grey sweater, and the casual clothes made him look younger, more human, though no less guarded. His hands were in his pockets, that constant defensive posture. And he was watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "There is nothing here," Elena said, and her voice was tight with controlled anger. "Not a single document with my mother's name. Not one reference to the trust. It is like she never existed." Julian entered the room slowly, maintaining distance but present, attentive. That is not uncommon. If a trust was established outside the normal Foundation channels, it might have been filed differently, or not filed here at all. Elena stood, needing to move to release the energy coiling inside her, or it was destroyed, removed, hidden by someone who did not want it found. Julian did not deny this. He simply looked at her, and in his eyes Elena saw something that surprised her. Belief. He believed her. Maybe not completely, maybe not without reservation, but enough to acknowledge that what she was saying might be true. "There are other places to look," he said quietly. "My father kept private records, files he did not share with the Foundation's general archive. They are in his personal office, which has been sealed since he died." Elena's heart began to beat faster. "Can I access them?" Julian hesitated, and Elena could see the conflict playing across his face. He was offering her something, but it cost him to do it. It meant opening doors he had kept closed, letting her deeper into the family's secrets, risking whatever he might find there. "Yes, but I will need to be there with you." "The office is locked and only I have the key." Elena nodded, understanding that this was the condition, the price of access. She would not be alone in whatever she discovered. Julian would be there watching, witnessing, unable to claim ignorance if the truth turned out to be as ugly as she suspected. When? Now, if you are ready. She was ready. She had been ready for 3 years. Julian led her to the elevator, and they rode in silence up to the 64th floor, a level Eleanor's keycard did not access. The doors opened onto a private hallway dimly lit, with only 3 doors visible. One led to Julian's apartment, one to a conference room, and one at the end of the hall bore a simple brass plaque, Robert Hargrove, Private, Office. Julian unlocked the door with an actual key, old-fashioned brass, the kind that required turning and feeling the mechanisms inside the lock align. The door swung open, and Eleanor followed him into a room that felt like stepping back in time. Robert Hargrove's office was everything the Foundation's modern spaces were not. Dark wood paneling, leather furniture worn soft with use, bookshelves lined with volumes that looked read rather than decorative. There was a massive desk, its surface cluttered with pens and papers that no one had touched in 7 years, and behind it, a wall of filing cabinets, each one labeled with years and categories in neat handwriting. Julian stood in the doorway, not quite entering, and Elena realized this was difficult for him. Being in this room, being surrounded by his father's presence, his father's things, his father's unfinished business. "I have not been in here since the day he died," Julian said softly. "Vivian wanted to clear it out, to convert it into something else, but I would not allow it. I locked the door and left everything exactly as it was. Why?" Julian looked at her, and in that moment, she saw past his armor, saw the grief he carried, the complicated love and anger and guilt that defined his relationship with the man who had made him. "Because I wanted to believe that if I left it untouched, I might understand him someday. Might figure out who he really was beneath all the charm and the deals and the lies." Eleanor felt something shift in her perception of Julian. He was not just the cold heir protecting his inheritance. He was a son still trying to make sense of his father, still looking for answers to questions he had never been allowed to ask. She moved to the filing cabinets and began opening drawers, scanning the labels. Trusts, investments, legal agreements, personal correspondence. Everything was meticulously organized, typical of a man who had built an empire on details. Julian remained by the door, watching but not interfering, and Elena could feel the weight of his attention on her, the way he tracked her movements, the way his body remained rigid, prepared for something he could not name. She found it in the 3rd cabinet, a file labeled simply, Private Trusts. 1995 to 2000. Her hands were shaking as she pulled it out and laid it on the desk. Inside were dozens of documents, each one outlining a trust established for someone connected to the Hargrove family, in ways that were not official, not public. Mistresses, maybe. Illegitimate children. People who had been paid to keep quiet, to disappear, to accept money in exchange for silence. And there, halfway through the stack, was her mother's name. Victoria Cortez. Trust established January 1998. Beneficiary and any children. Amount, $47 million, to be distributed in monthly installments until beneficiary's death or until child reaches age 25, at which point full control transfers to child. Elena's vision blurred. She had known, had believed, but seeing it here in official documents in her mother's name written in ink that had not faded was different. It made it real. It made the theft, the erasure, the years of her mother's suffering undeniable. She read further. The trust had been funded through a series of offshore accounts, carefully structured to avoid scrutiny. The first payment had been made in February 1998. The last payment, according to the records, had been in August 2001. 3 years. Her mother had received payments for only 3 years before they stopped, before someone decided that Victoria Cortez no longer deserved what she had been promised. And at the bottom of the file, there was a letter, handwritten, dated September 2001, in Robert Hargrove's distinctive script. To whom it may concern, the trust established for Victoria Cortez is hereby terminated. All remaining funds are to be reallocated to the General Foundation endowment. No further contact with Ms. Cortez is to be maintained. This matter is closed. Below that, a signature. Not Robert Hargrove's. Someone else had signed this termination. Someone who had authority, who had access. who had decided to end what Robert had begun. The signature was Vivian Ashford Hargrove. Elena looked up at Julian, holding the document, and saw that he had gone very pale. He had seen it too, had read it from across the room, his eyes sharp enough to catch his stepmother's name even from that distance. "She ended it," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your father created the trust and she destroyed it." Julian moved then, finally crossing the threshold into his father's office, and came to stand beside the desk. Not close to Elena, still maintaining his careful distance, but present, engaged, no longer able to hide behind neutrality. He took the document from Elena's hands without touching her fingers, a careful maneuver that spoke to years of practiced avoidance, and read it in detail. His jaw was clenched so tightly, Elena could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. "My father died in March 2001, Julian said finally. "This letter is dated 6 months after his death. Vivian had full control of the foundation by then. She could authorize anything, terminate anything without question. But why?" Elena demanded. "Why would she do this? What did my mother ever do to her?" Julian set the document down and turned away, moving to the window, needing distance to process what he was feeling. Elena could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands were fisted at his sides, the war being waged inside him between loyalty and truth. "My father had affairs," Julian said quietly. "Many affairs. It was something everyone knew but no one spoke about. Vivian tolerated them because she had her own power, her own position, and she understood that their marriage was a partnership, not a romance. But when he died, when she became the sole authority, she cleaned house. Anyone who had been connected to him, anyone who might make claims or cause problems was removed, paid off or shut down. Your mother was not the only one." Elena felt sick. Her mother had not been special, had not been loved. She had been just another inconvenient woman, another loose end to be tied off and forgotten. "But your father promised her," Elena said, and her voice broke despite her efforts to keep it steady. "He put it in writing. He created a trust for me, for his daughter. Because I am his daughter, Julian. I am your half-sister." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and irreversible. Julian turned to look at her, and Elena saw shock register on his face, followed by something that might have been recognition. He was staring at her now, really looking, seeing the shape of her eyes, the line of her jaw, the features that must have echoed something in his father's face, in his own. "Did you know?" he asked. "Before you came here, did you know that is what you were claiming?" Elena shook her head. "I thought the trust was just for my mother. I thought maybe your father had cared about her, had wanted to help her. I did not know. Not until I saw this file. Not until I saw that it was established for any children. I never met him. My mother never told me his name. She only said he was a good man who had been forced to walk away. But now I understand. He did not walk away. He was already gone. And Vivian erased us." Julian sat down heavily in his father's chair, looking suddenly exhausted, decades older than his 42 years. He put his head in his hands, and Elena had the strangest urge to reach out to comfort him, but she knew he would not accept it. Touch was not something he allowed, even in moments of crisis, maybe especially then. "If this is true," Julian said finally, "if you are his daughter, then you are entitled to far more than the trust. You are entitled to a share of his estate, to a position in the foundation, to the Hargrove name if you want it." Elena sat down across from him, the desk between them like a border they could not cross. "I do not want the name. I do not even want the money, not really. I want my mother's story to be told. I want it acknowledged that she existed, that she mattered, that she was not just some woman to be erased when she became inconvenient. That is what I want." Julian looked at her, and for the first time since they had met, Elena saw something like respect in his eyes. "Then we will do a DNA test. We will prove it one way or another. And if it confirms what you believe, then I will make sure Vivian answers for what she did." Elena felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not now. Not when she was so close to everything she had fought for. "Thank you," she said simply. Julian nodded, then stood, needing to leave this room, to escape the weight of his father's presence and the revelations that were reshaping his understanding of his family, his life, his own identity. But before he could move toward the door, it opened and a woman entered. Tall, elegant, in her late 60s, but wearing it like an evening gown, tailored and deliberate, steel-grey eyes that swept the room, taking in Julian, Elena, the open filing cabinets, the documents spread across the desk. And her expression did not change, did not reveal surprise or anger or anything at all. She simply smiled, small and cold, the smile of a predator who had caught her prey exactly where she expected to find them. "Julian," Vivian said, her voice smooth as silk over steel. "I see you have been giving our guest quite a tour. How generous of you." Elena stood, instinct telling her to face this woman on her feet, to not show weakness or fear. And Vivian turned that terrible smile on her, assessing, cataloguing, dismissing. "You must be Miss Cortez. I have heard so much about you. Well, not much, but enough. Enough to know that you have made some very interesting claims about your connection to this family." Eleanor met her gaze without flinching. "I have made no claims that I cannot prove, Mrs. Ashford Hargrove. Please call me Vivian. We are not so formal here, not when we are family, or claiming to be." There was poison beneath those words, venom delivered with perfect courtesy. Elena could feel Julian tensing beside her, could sense his discomfort, his desire to intervene, but his uncertainty about how. Vivian moved into the room with the confidence of someone who owned every space she entered. She picked up one of the documents from the desk, the trust agreement, and read it with the same mild interest someone might show a grocery list. "How curious," she said. "I do not remember this file being authorized for access. Julian, did you give Miss Cortez permission to examine private family documents?" "She is entitled to see anything relevant to her claim," Julian said, his voice careful, controlled. "I made that agreement when I accepted her petition." Vivian set the document down and turned to face him fully, and Elena saw something dangerous flash in those grey eyes. Something that made her understand why Julian had warned her about this woman. "You accepted her petition without consulting the board. Without consulting me. That was unwise, Julian. We have protocols for a reason. We have structures. You cannot simply open the family archives to anyone who walks in with a story and a piece of paper." "She is not anyone," Julian said, and his voice was harder now, firmer. "And her claim has merit. I have seen the evidence. Evidence can be manufactured. Stories can be told. People lie, Julian, especially when there is money involved." Vivian was still looking at Julian, but Elena knew those words were meant for her. The accusation was clear. "You are a liar. You are a con artist. You are here to steal what does not belong to you." "My mother did not lie," Elena said, stepping forward, drawing Vivian's attention back to her. "And I am not here to steal anything. I am here to reclaim what was stolen from us. By you." The room went very quiet. Vivian's smile did not change, but something in her posture sharpened, became more focused, more dangerous. "I see. You have already decided that I am the villain of your little story. How convenient. Tell me, Miss Cortez, what exactly do you think I stole from you?" Elena pointed to the termination letter, the one with Vivian's signature at the bottom. "That trust was established by Robert Hargrove for my mother and for me. You terminated it 6 months after he died. You took $44 million that should have come to us and reallocated it to the foundation. You erased my mother from the records as if she had never existed. You stole her story, her dignity, her future, and mine." Vivian picked up the letter, examined her own signature, then set it down with a small shrug. "Robert established many trusts. Most of them were poorly conceived, emotional decisions made in moments of weakness. When I took control of the foundation, I cleaned up his messes. I consolidated accounts. I eliminated redundancies. Your mother's trust was one of many that were deemed unnecessary." "Unnecessary," Elena repeated, her voice shaking now with rage she could no longer contain. "My mother's life was unnecessary. I was unnecessary? In the context of the Foundation's mission, yes. We are a charitable organization, Miss Cortez. We support causes that benefit society, that create lasting change. We do not exist to fund the comfortable lifestyles of women who happen to sleep with wealthy men." The words were like a slap, designed to wound, to humiliate, to remind Elena of her place. And they worked. For a moment, Elena could not breathe, could not think past the red haze of fury and shame and grief that Vivienne's casual cruelty had unleashed. But then Julian spoke, and his voice cut through the room like a blade. Enough. It was one word, quiet, almost soft, but it carried such absolute authority that both women turned to look at him. Julian was standing now, and the casual clothes no longer made him look younger or more human. He looked dangerous. He looked like a man who had reached his limit and was prepared to cross lines he had never crossed before. Miss Cortez is my guest. She is here at my invitation. She has my permission to access any and all Foundation records. And you will treat her with respect, Vivienne, or you will leave this building. Vivienne's eyes widened slightly, the first genuine reaction Eleanor had seen from her. She was not used to Julian defying her, not used to him standing his ground. And for a moment, Eleanor saw something flicker across Vivienne's face that might have been fear, or respect, or the beginning of a calculation about how to regain control. Julian, Vivienne said, her voice softer now, almost gentle, I understand that you feel obligated to be fair. That is admirable, but you are being manipulated. This woman is not who she claims to be, and if you continue down this path, you will destroy everything your father built. If what she says is true, Julian said, then everything my father built was already rotten, and maybe it is time to tear it down. The silence that followed was absolute. Eleanor could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of what Julian had just said, the choice he was making, the side he was taking. Vivienne looked at him for a long moment, then at Eleanor, and when she spoke again, her voice was cold and final. Very well. If you insist on pursuing this, Julian, then do so. But know that you are on your own. The board will not support you. The lawyers will not back you. And when this falls apart, when her lies are exposed and the Foundation's reputation is damaged, you will bear the consequences alone. She walked to the door, paused and looked back. I raised you to be smarter than this. I hope you remember that when you are picking up the pieces. Then she was gone, the door closing behind her with a soft click that somehow felt louder than any slam. Julian and Elena stood in the office, surrounded by Robert Hargrove's ghosts, and neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Elena broke the silence. She raised you? Julian nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the closed door. My mother died when I was 5. Vivienne married my father when I was 6. She was the only mother I ever really knew, and I both love her and fear her in ways I do not fully understand. Elena felt a wave of sympathy despite everything, despite the fact that Vivienne was clearly her enemy, the architect of her mother's suffering, because she could see now what it had cost Julian to stand up to her, to choose truth over loyalty, to risk the only family he had left. I am sorry, Elena said softly. I know this is not easy for you. Julian looked at her then, really looked at her, and Elena saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Hunger, not sexual. Or not only sexual, but something deeper, more desperate. The hunger of someone who had been alone for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to have someone stand beside him, to not face everything by himself. We should get the DNA test done as soon as possible, he said, his voice rough. The sooner we have proof, the stronger our position will be. Our position, Elena repeated. You said our Julian's jaw tightened, and she saw him struggling with something, some admission he did not want to make but could not avoid. If you are my sister, then this is my fight too. And even if you are not, if somehow this is all a mistake or a lie, I need to know. I need to know who my father really was, what he was capable of, what Vivienne did in his name. So yes, our position, our fight. Elena felt something warm unfurl in her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope, like trust, like the beginning of a connection she had not expected and was not sure she wanted. Julian Hargrove was supposed to be her opponent, the man standing between her and justice. But here he was, offering to stand with her instead, to share the burden, to face the truth together no matter where it led. Thank you, she said again, and meant it more than she had ever meant anything. Julian nodded, then moved toward the door, needing to leave, to process, to retreat into whatever private space he used, to manage the emotions he refused to show. But at the threshold he paused and looked back at her. Elena, he said, and it was the first time he had used her first name. Be careful with Vivienne. She meant what she said. She will do everything she can to discredit you, to make you look like a liar and a fraud. She will dig into your past, your finances, every relationship you have ever had. She will use anything she finds against you. And she will not hesitate to destroy you if she believes it will protect the foundation. I know, Eleanor said, but I am not afraid of her. Julian's expression was unreadable. You should be, because I am. Then he left, and Elena was alone in Robert Hargrove's office with her mother's file and the slowly sinking realization that she had just made an enemy of one of the most powerful women in New York. But she had also made an ally of Julian, and somehow, despite everything, that felt more important. She gathered the documents carefully, making copies of everything she might need, and returned the file to its cabinet. The office looked exactly as it had when she entered, as if nothing had changed, as if the world had not just shifted on its axis, but everything had changed. Elena knew the truth now, knew who her father had been, what he had done, what had been done in his name after his death. And she knew that the next 87 days would be a battle, a war fought with documents and lawyers and public opinion, with Vivian wielding all the power and resources of the Hargrove empire against her. But she also knew she was not alone. Julian had chosen to stand with her, and that made all the difference. As she rode the elevator back down to her floor, Eleanor caught her reflection in the mirrored walls. She looked the same as she had that morning. Same dark hair, same determined eyes, same jasmine scent clinging to her skin. But inside something had shifted. She had come to this tower seeking justice for her mother. But now she was seeking something more, understanding, connection, a place in a story that had always been incomplete. And maybe, though she barely dared admit it to herself, she was seeking Julian. The man who could not touch but who looked at her like she was the only real thing in his carefully controlled world. The man who stood alone in towers and kept himself apart from everyone, but who had just offered to stand with her. She did not know where this would lead. Did not know if the DNA test would prove what she believed or shatter everything she thought she knew. Did not know if Julian would remain her ally or if Vivian's influence would pull him back, would remind him where his true loyalties should lie. But for now, in this moment, Eleanor had what she had come for: proof, acknowledgement, a chance to tell her mother's story and demand that it be heard. And as she entered her apartment and stood once again at those magnificent windows, looking out at the city that had taken so much from her mother and given so little back, Eleanor made a silent promise. She would not leave this tower until the truth was told, until justice was served, until Vivian Ashford Hargrove answered for what she had done, no matter what it cost, no matter how long it took, no matter what she had to sacrifice to see it through. The DNA test was scheduled for the following morning at a private medical facility that catered to people who valued discretion above all else. Eleanor arrived early, her stomach twisted with anxiety and anticipation, and found Julian already there, standing by the window in the small waiting room, looking out at nothing in particular. He was wearing another of his perfectly tailored suits, armor against the world, but there was something different about him today. Air tension in his shoulders that suggested he had not slept, that the weight of what they were about to confirm or deny was pressing down on him with the same force it pressed on her. They did not speak as they were called into separate rooms. A nurse took Elena's blood with efficient kindness, asked her to swab the inside of her cheek, labeled everything with codes instead of names. The whole process took less than 15 minutes, but those minutes felt eternal, each second heavy with the knowledge that her entire life, her entire understanding of who she was, hung in the balance of what these samples would reveal. When she emerged, Julian was already back in the waiting room. The doctor, an older man with kind eyes and a manner that suggested he had seen every possible human drama play out in this office, explained that the results would take 3 to 5 days, that they would be delivered in a sealed envelope. That confidentiality was guaranteed. Julian nodded, shook the doctor's hand with visible effort, a brief contact that he ended as quickly as possible, and then they were outside, standing on the sidewalk in the bright morning sun, two people whose lives had just become irrevocably tangled together. "I need coffee," Elena said, more to break the silence than because she actually wanted coffee. Julian glanced at her, seemed about to decline, then nodded. "I know a place." They walked 3 blocks to a small cafe tucked between 2 larger buildings, the kind of place that existed in pockets throughout Manhattan, serving people who valued quality over atmosphere. Julian ordered black coffee. Elena ordered a cappuccino she knew she would not finish. They sat at a table by the window, and for a long time neither of them spoke. Finally, Elena broke the silence. What happens if the test confirms it? If I really am his daughter? Julian stirred his coffee, though he had added nothing to it, a nervous gesture that seemed out of character for someone usually so controlled. Then everything changes. The foundation structure, the distribution of assets, the board composition. My father's will would need to be reassessed. You would have legal standing to challenge every decision made since his death, including the termination of your mother's trust. And what about you? Elena asked softly. What happens to you? Julian looked at her, and she saw something vulnerable in his eyes, something he rarely allowed anyone to see. I would have a sister. I have never had a sister. Never had any siblings at all. I do not know what that means or how to be that. Elena felt an unexpected wave of emotion. She had come to New York thinking of Julian as an obstacle, someone standing between her and justice. But now, sitting across from him in this quiet cafe, watching him struggle with the possibility of having family, real family, not the cold transactional relationships that defined the Hargrove world, she saw him differently. Saw the loneliness that defined his life, the isolation he had built around himself, the hunger for connection that he did not know how to satisfy. My mother used to tell me stories, Elena said, her voice distant with memory, about family, about what it means to belong to someone, to have people who choose you not because of what you can give them, but because of who you are. She never had that. Her family disowned her when she got pregnant with me. And your father, my father, he could not give her that either. He could only give her money. And then even that was taken away. Julian's hands were wrapped around his coffee cup, and Eleanor noticed how white his knuckles were, how tightly he was gripping the ceramic, as if it were the only thing anchoring him to reality. My father was good at giving money, Julian said quietly. It was the only thing he knew how to give. He could write a check, establish a trust, make grand gestures. But he could not be present, could not be vulnerable, could not touch the people he was supposed to love without it being a performance for someone else's benefit. Is that why you do not touch? Elena asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Because of him? Julian went very still. His eyes met hers and Elena saw pain there, old pain buried deep but never healed. No, that is because of what happened after he died. Because of what I learned about touch, about intimacy, about what it means to let someone close enough to destroy you. Elena wanted to ask more, wanted to understand, but she could see that Julian had said all he was willing to say. That pushing further would only make him retreat behind his walls. I am sorry, she said instead, for whatever happened to you, for whatever made you build those walls. Julian looked away, out the window at the people passing by, living their ordinary lives, touching casually, hugging, holding hands, taking for granted the simple human contact that he denied himself. Do not be sorry. The walls keep me safe. They always have. But they also keep you alone. The words hung between them, true and undeniable. Julian did not respond, but Elena saw something shift in his expression. Some acknowledgement that she had touched on a truth he spent every day trying to ignore. They finished their coffee in silence, and then Julian walked her back to the tower. At the entrance he paused, and Elena could see him wrestling with something, some decision or impulse he was trying to evaluate. Elena, he said, and his use of her first name still sent a small shock through her system. The next few days will be difficult. Vivienne will escalate. She will try to turn the board against you, against me. She will plant stories in the media, use her connections to make you look like a fraud. I need you to be prepared for that, to be ready for how ugly this might get. I am ready, Elena said, though she was not sure that was entirely true. I did not come this far to give up now. Julian nodded, but there was something in his eyes, some warning he could not quite articulate. Just remember that Vivienne does not fight openly. She fights with whispers and insinuations, with doubts planted in the right ears. She will make people question you, make them question me, and she will do it all with such elegance that no one will see her hand in it. Then, We will have to be smarter than her. Julian almost smiled. Almost, I hope we are. He left her there in the lobby and disappeared into the elevator, and Elena watched him go, feeling the weight of what was coming, the storm that was gathering around them both. The next 3 days were exactly as Julian had predicted. Elena woke on the second day to find her photo on the front page of a tabloid website, accompanied by a headline that made her stomach turn. Mystery woman claims Hargrove fortune, past raises questions. The article was a masterpiece of innuendo, carefully worded to avoid direct accusations, but filled with suggestions that Elena had a history of targeting wealthy men, that her mother had been a known opportunist, that the whole thing smelled of a carefully orchestrated con. Elena read it with shaking hands, seeing her life twisted into something unrecognizable. Her mother's memory dragged through mud by people who had never known her, never understood the quiet dignity with which Victoria Cortez had faced poverty and abandonment. She wanted to respond, to defend herself, to scream the truth at everyone who would listen. But Julian, when she called him in a fury, counseled patience. This is what she does. She creates a narrative, plants it in the public consciousness, and then sits back while other people spread it for her. If you respond, you legitimize it. You give it oxygen. The only thing that will counter this is the DNA test. Once we have proof, the narrative shifts. Until then, we stay silent. But they are calling my mother a gold digger, Elena said, her voice breaking. They are saying I am just like her, that this is some kind of scam. I know, and I am sorry. But trust me on this. Vivienne wants you to react emotionally. She wants you to make a mistake, to say something that can be used against you. Do not give her what she wants. Elena hung up, feeling helpless and angry, two emotions that combined into something toxic and consuming. She spent the rest of the day in her apartment, avoiding the pitying looks from staff members who had clearly read the articles, avoiding the reporters who had somehow found out where she was staying and were camped outside the building. On the third day, a woman showed up at Elena's door. She was young, maybe 25, with red-rimmed eyes and a manila folder clutched in her hands. She introduced herself as Sarah Mitchell and said she had information about Vivienne that Elena needed to hear. They sat in Elena's apartment, and Sarah told her story in a voice that shook with suppressed emotion. She had been an assistant at the foundation 3 years ago, had made the mistake of discovering irregularities in some of Vivienne's personal expense accounts, had tried to report them through proper channels, and had been systematically destroyed for it. Her reputation ruined, her career ended, her name blacklisted throughout the non-profit sector. Vivienne does not forgive threats, Sarah said, opening the folder to reveal pages of documentation, emails, financial records, and she does not forget. I tried to fight back, but I did not have the resources, did not have proof that would hold up in court, but I kept everything, just in case someone someday had the courage to take her on. Elena looked through the documents, her mind racing. This was ammunition. This was evidence of a pattern, proof that Vivienne had a history of silencing anyone who questioned her authority or threatened her control. Why are you giving this to me? Elena asked. Because I read about you, about what you are trying to do. And I want to help. I want someone to finally hold her accountable for what she does to people. Elena took the folder, feeling its weight, understanding that this was both a gift and a responsibility. Sarah was trusting her with her story, with her pain, with her hope for justice. Thank you, Elena said. I will not let this be for nothing. Sarah left, and Elena immediately called Julian. He came to her apartment within 20 minutes, and they spread the documents across the dining table, reading through each one, connecting dots, building a case. This is serious, Julian said, his voice tight. If even half of this is true, Vivienne has been using foundation funds for personal expenses for years. That is embezzlement. That is criminal. It is also leverage, Elena said. If she keeps attacking me, we can threaten to expose this. Julian shook his head. No, we cannot threaten. If we threaten, she will find a way to make this disappear, to destroy the evidence, to silence Sarah the way she has silenced others. We need to be strategic. We wait for the DNA results. We establish your legitimacy first. Then we bring this forward, not as a threat, but as part of a larger pattern of misconduct that needs to be addressed. Elena nodded, understanding the logic, even as every instinct screamed at her to act now. To strike while she had the advantage. How much longer until we get the results? Julian checked his watch. They said 3 to 5 days. Tomorrow is day 4. We should hear something soon. They worked through the evening, organizing the documents, creating a timeline of Vivian's misconduct, building a case that could not be easily dismissed or explained away. And as they worked, Elena became aware of how close they were sitting, how their hands occasionally brushed as they reached for the same paper, how Julian would flinch slightly each time, an automatic response he could not control. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said during a pause, when the silence had grown too heavy. "What happened to you? What made you stop touching people?" Julian's entire body tensed. He stood abruptly, moved to the window, put distance between them. "Elena, do not. I am not asking to hurt you. I am asking because I want to understand. Because if we are going to do this together, if we are going to take on Vivian together, I need to know what I am working with. I need to know your limits." Julian stood at the window for a long time, his back to her, and Elena thought he would not answer. But then he spoke, his voice so quiet she had to strain to hear it. "I was 23, fresh out of graduate school. My father had just made me a junior partner in the foundation, a symbolic position mostly, something to give me experience and make me feel important. There was a woman. Her name was Catherine. She worked in development, fundraising, events. She was beautiful and charming, and she paid attention to me in a way no one ever had before." He paused, and Elena could see his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "We dated for 6 months. I thought I loved her. I thought she loved me. I thought I had finally found someone who saw me, Julian, not just the Hargrove name and money. Then my father died, and suddenly I was not just a junior partner anymore. I was the heir. I controlled everything, and Catherine saw her opportunity. Elena felt her heart sinking, already knowing where this was going. She tried to manipulate me, wanted me to marry her immediately, to give her access to the foundation, to the money. When I hesitated, when I said I needed time to grieve, to process, she became violent. Not physically, not at first, but emotionally. She would touch me in ways that felt invasive, possessive. Would grab my face and force me to look at her when I tried to pull away. Would corner me in rooms and press her body against mine, while she whispered all the things she was going to take from me if I did not cooperate. His voice was shaking now, and Elena wanted desperately to go to him, to offer comfort, but she knew he would not accept it. One night she came to my apartment. She had been drinking. She tried to seduce me, tried to make me promise things I could not promise. And when I refused, when I tried to make her leave, she attacked me, scratched my face, my chest, my arms. She was screaming that I owed her, that I had made her believe she would be someone, and now I was going to take it all away. Security had to remove her, and I stood there, bleeding, feeling her touch on every part of me like a brand, like something I could never wash off. Elena felt tears on her cheeks, tears for this man who had been so violated, so betrayed, who had responded by building walls so high no one could ever hurt him that way again. After that, Julian continued, I could not stand to be touched, could not bear the idea of someone's hands on me without my control. Every touch felt like an attack, like someone trying to take something from me. So I stopped. Stopped dating, stopped allowing physical contact of any kind. It was easier to be alone than to risk feeling that way again. Julian, Elena whispered, I am so sorry. That should never have happened to you. He turned to face her and his eyes were dry but haunted. It made me strong, made me careful, made me untouchable, in every sense of the word. And that has served me well in business, in managing the foundation, in dealing with people like Vivian who would destroy anyone who showed weakness. But it also made you lonely. Yes, it also made me lonely. They stood there, separated by the length of the room but connected by the vulnerability of the moment, by the truth that had been spoken and could not be taken back. And Elena understood now why Julian had agreed to help her, why he had stood up to Vivian, why he was willing to risk everything to find the truth about his father. Because he was tired of being alone, tired of living behind walls, tired of being untouchable. The results came the next morning. Margaret delivered the envelope to Julian's office at 9 sharp, and he immediately called Elena to join him. They sat across from his desk, the sealed envelope between them like a verdict that would determine both their futures. "Do you want to open it?" Julian asked. Elena shook her head, her mouth too dry to speak. Julian took a silver letter opener, the same one his father must have used countless times, and sliced through the seal with one clean motion. He pulled out the papers, read them silently, and Elena watched his face for any reaction, any sign of what the results said. But Julian's expression remained neutral, unreadable, until he looked up at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her heart stop. "It is positive. 99.97% probability. You are Robert Hargrove's daughter. You are my half-sister." Elena could not breathe, could not think. The room seemed to tilt and blur around her. She had known, had believed, but having it confirmed, having it proven beyond any doubt was different. It made it real in a way nothing else could. Julian stood and walked around the desk, and for a moment, Elena thought he might do something unprecedented, might reach out, might offer her some physical gesture of comfort or solidarity. But he stopped just short, maintaining his careful distance, and instead simply looked at her with an expression that might have been grief or relief or something between the two. "You are family," he said quietly. "That means something. That means everything." Elena felt tears streaming down her face, years of pain and anger and longing finally finding release. Her mother had not been lying, had not been delusional, had been exactly what she said she was, a woman who had been loved by Robert Hargrove, who had borne his child, who had been promised security and then abandoned when it became inconvenient. "What do we do now?" Elena asked. "Now we go to war. We take these results to the board. We demand a full audit of the Foundation's finances, including Vivian's personal expenses. We expose what she did to your mother, to Sarah Mitchell, to anyone else who got in her way. And we force the Foundation to acknowledge you, to give you what you are owed not just in money but in recognition, in dignity." Elena wiped her tears and stood, feeling something solidify inside her, something that had been soft and uncertain but was now hard and clear. She will not go quietly. No, she will fight with everything she has. But we have the truth now, and the truth is stronger than her lies. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Julian scheduled an emergency board meeting for the following week. Elena contacted Sarah Mitchell and other people who had been damaged by Vivian's manipulations, building a coalition of witnesses. They worked side by side, sometimes in comfortable silence, sometimes in intense debate about strategy and timing, and how to present their case in a way that could not be dismissed or minimized. And through it all, Elena was aware of the shift between them. They were no longer adversaries forced into an uneasy alliance. They were family. Broken, complicated family, but family nonetheless, and that meant something neither of them had expected it to mean. Late that evening, as they were finalizing documents in Julian's office, Elena asked the question that had been building inside her all day. "Do you think he would have acknowledged me? Your father, our father, if he had lived. Do you think he would have brought me into the family?" Julian was quiet for a long time, staring at the portrait of Robert Hargrove that hung on the wall, the official version of the man, polished and perfect and revealing nothing of who he really was. "I do not know. He was capable of great generosity and great selfishness, often in the same breath. He loved to play the hero, to rescue people, to be seen as magnanimous. But he also loved his comfort, his reputation, his carefully constructed life. Bringing you into it would have required him to be brave in ways he never was, to stand up to Vivian, to face society's judgment, to be more than the image he presented to the world. So you think he would not have? I think he would have wanted to, and I think that would have had to be enough for him." Elena felt the truth of that settle over her like a weight. Her father had been a coward, a well-meaning, generous, charming coward who had created a child and then walked away, leaving her and her mother to struggle while he maintained his perfect life in his perfect tower. But his son, his legitimate heir, the man who had inherited his name and his fortune and his responsibilities, was not a coward. Julian had chosen to stand with her, had chosen truth over comfort, family over image, justice over the easy path. "Thank you," Elena said softly, "for believing me, for helping me, for being better than he was." Julian looked at her, and in his eyes Elena saw something she had not seen before. Not hunger now, but something gentler. Something that might have been the beginning of love. The familial kind. The kind that said, "You are mine and I am yours, and that bond cannot be broken. You are my sister," Julian said, and his voice was rough with emotion he rarely allowed himself to feel. "That makes you my responsibility, my family, and I protect what is mine." Elena smiled through fresh tears, understanding that for Julian, this was the closest thing to a declaration of love he was capable of making. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. The board meeting was scheduled for Tuesday morning, and Julian had made it clear that this was not optional attendance. Every board member, including Vivian, would be there. Every decision maker, every person with power in the foundation, would hear what they had discovered and would be forced to make a choice about where they stood. Vivian, for her part, had been uncharacteristically quiet. No more planted stories in the media, no more whisper campaigns. Just silence, watchful and waiting. And that silence was somehow more terrifying than any attack could have been. On Monday evening, the night before the meeting, Eleanor could not sleep. She paced her apartment, rehearsing what she would say, how she would present herself, how she would remain calm and controlled in the face of whatever Vivian threw at her. At midnight, unable to bear the solitude any longer, she took the elevator up to the foundation's main floor, thinking she would walk the halls, exhaust herself into sleep. But when the elevator doors opened, she found Julian there, standing in the darkened gallery in front of his father's portrait, looking like a man wrestling with ghosts. "Could not sleep either?" Elena asked softly. Julian turned, unsurprised to see her. "I keep thinking about what you said, about him being a coward. You were right, he was. And I have spent so much of my life trying not to be like him, trying to be stronger, more controlled, more honest. But in the process, I became something else. Something isolated and cold and incapable of the kind of human warmth he at least could fake." "You are not cold," Elena said, moving closer, but respecting his boundaries. "You are careful. You are protected, but underneath you feel everything. Maybe too much." Julian looked at her, and the distance between them seemed both infinite and insignificant. "When you came here," he said quietly, "you disrupted everything. My routine, my control, my carefully maintained equilibrium. I should resent you for that, should want you gone, but instead I find myself grateful. Because you made me feel something again, made me care about something beyond just maintaining the status quo. You made me want to be brave." "You are brave," Elena said. "You stood up to Vivian. You chose truth over comfort. That is the definition of bravery." Julian took a half-step toward her, an unconscious movement, and Elena held her breath. They were closer now than they had ever been. Close enough that she could see the way his chest rose and fell with his breathing, could smell the faint scent of his cologne, expensive and subtle, could feel the heat radiating from his body despite the careful space he maintained. "I want to thank you," Julian said, his voice barely above a whisper, "for being here, for giving me a reason to fight. You do not need to thank me. We are family now. This is what family does. Yes, family." But the way he said it, the way he was looking at her, suggested he was feeling something more complicated than simple familial affection. And Elena, standing there in the darkness with this man who had been hurt so badly that he could not bear to be touched, felt an answering pull, a desire not to cross his boundaries but to stand beside them, to be close in whatever way he could tolerate. "Tomorrow changes everything," Julian said. "Whatever happens in that meeting, whatever Vivian does, whatever the board decides, nothing will be the same after tomorrow. I know. Are you ready?" Elena thought about her mother, about Victoria Cortez, who had worked herself to exhaustion trying to give her daughter a better life, who had died believing she had failed, who deserved to be remembered, to be honored, to have her story told with the dignity it deserved. "Yes, I am ready." Julian nodded, then did something that shocked them both. He extended his hand, held it out in the space between them, offering her the one thing he never offered anyone: touch, connection, a physical acknowledgement of their bond. Eleanor stared at his hand, understanding what this cost him, what it meant for him to offer it. She raised her own hand slowly, carefully, and took his. Their palms pressed together, skin on skin, and she felt Julian flinch, saw his jaw clench, watched him fight every instinct that screamed at him to pull away. But he did not pull away. He held her hand and Elena held his, and they stood there in the darkness beneath Robert Hargrove's portrait, two broken people who had found each other in the ruins of a family built on lies, and they made a silent promise to stand together, to fight together, to see this through to the end no matter what it cost them. When Julian finally released her hand, his eyes were bright with unshed tears, and Elena understood that she had just witnessed something extraordinary. A man who had not allowed himself to be touched in 19 years had touched her, had chosen connection over fear, had taken the first step toward becoming someone who could live in the world again instead of just observing it from behind walls. "Thank you," Elena whispered. Julian nodded, not trusting himself to speak, and they stood together in that sacred silence until the first light of dawn began to break over the city, turning the sky from black to gray to gold. And when they finally left the gallery to prepare for the battle ahead, they left as more than just allies. They left as family, as brother and sister, who had found each other in the darkness and decided to walk into the light together, whatever waited for them there. The boardroom occupied the entire 63rd floor of the tower, a massive space designed to intimidate and impress in equal measure. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Manhattan, a reminder to everyone who sat at that long mahogany table that they were above the ordinary world, making decisions that affected millions of lives and billions of dollars. The chairs were leather, dark and expensive, arranged around a table that could seat 30, but today held only 12. 12 people who would decide Elena's fate, and perhaps Julian's as well. Elena arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in a navy suit she had bought specifically for this moment, armor of her own making. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, her makeup minimal but precise. She wore her mother's small pearl earrings, the only jewelry Victoria had managed to keep through all the years of struggle, and touched them now like a talisman as she entered the room. Julian was already there, standing by the windows, looking out at the city with the same distant expression he wore when he needed to distance himself from his emotions. He turned when she entered, and Elena saw that he was pale, tense, but there was steel in his eyes, a determination that had not been there a week ago. "Are you ready?" he asked. "As ready as I will ever be." They took their seats at one end of the table side by side, a deliberate choice that signaled their alliance. The DNA results were in a folder in front of Julian, along with the financial documents Sarah Mitchell had provided, along with affidavits from 3 other former employees who had been silenced or pushed out by Vivian over the years. It was an arsenal of truth, and they were about to deploy every weapon they had. The board members began arriving. Thomas Chen, the Foundation's chief financial officer, a man in his 50s with silver hair and a reputation for absolute integrity. Margaret Sullivan, who had worked for the Foundation for 30 years and knew where every body was buried. David Rothstein, a prominent philanthropist who had served on the board since Robert Hargrove's time. And others, 7 more, each one a person of power and influence, each one someone who could make or break what happened here today. And then Vivian arrived. She entered the room like a queen entering her throne room, dressed in cream-colored silk that probably cost more than most people earned in a year. Her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her makeup flawless. She looked at Elena with the same mild interest someone might show a curious insect, then took her seat at the opposite end of the table. The position of authority, the place she had occupied for 7 years. "Shall we begin?" Vivian said, her voice smooth and controlled. "I understand Julian has called this emergency meeting to address some concerns, though I must say I find the drama of it all a bit excessive." Julian stood and the room fell silent. Elena could see how much this cost him, how every eye on him felt like a physical touch he had to endure. But he did not falter. 3 weeks ago, a woman named Elena Cortez came to this foundation claiming to be the rightful beneficiary of a trust established by my father, Robert Hargrove. I granted her request to investigate this claim, and what we have discovered goes far beyond a simple matter of inheritance. It reveals a pattern of misconduct, financial impropriety, and deliberate destruction of evidence that threatens the very integrity of this foundation. Vivian's expression did not change, but Elena saw something flicker in those steel-gray eyes. Calculation, assessment, the predator recognizing that the prey had somehow grown teeth. Julian, really. These are serious accusations. I hope you have more than the word of some opportunist to back them up. Julian opened the folder and removed the DNA results, holding them up for everyone to see. Elena Cortez is my half-sister. She is Robert Hargrove's biological daughter. Conceived with a woman named Victoria Cortez in 1997 and born in 1998. We have DNA evidence confirming this with 99.97% certainty. My father established a trust for her and her mother, worth $47 million, to be distributed over the course of their lifetimes. The room erupted in whispers, board members leaning toward each other, shock registering on faces that were usually so carefully controlled. Vivienne remained perfectly still, but Elena could see the tension in her jaw, the way her hands were gripping the armrests of her chair. "That is impossible," Vivienne said, her voice cold. "I would have known about such a trust. I managed all of Robert's financial affairs after his death." "You did know," Julian said, and his voice was hard now, uncompromising. "Because you terminated it. 6 months after my father died, you signed an order ending all payments to Victoria Cortez and reallocating the funds to the Foundation's general endowment. You erased her from the records as if she had never existed." He slid copies of the termination letter across the table, Vivienne's signature clear and unmistakable at the bottom. Board members picked them up, read them, looked at Vivienne with expressions that ranged from confusion to dawning horror. "Robert made many impulsive decisions," Vivienne said, her composure beginning to crack. "He established trusts for people who had no legitimate claim to Hargrove money. I was cleaning up his messes, protecting the Foundation from being bled dry by every woman who claimed to have slept with him. She was not just some woman," Elena said, speaking for the first time, her voice steady despite the rage building inside her. "She was the mother of his child. I am his child. And you stole from me. You stole my childhood, my education, my mother's peace of mind. You stole $44 million that was legally mine. And you did it because you could not stand the idea that your perfect family, your perfect foundation, might be tainted by the existence of an illegitimate daughter." The room was silent now, every eye moving between Elena and Vivienne, watching this confrontation unfold like spectators at a gladiatorial combat. "Even if what you say is true," Vivienne said, her voice dripping with contempt, "even if you are Robert's daughter, that does not give you any claim to the Foundation. You were born outside of marriage. You have no legal standing. And you certainly have no right to walk in here and make demands after all these years." "Actually," Julian said, "she has every right. Under New York law, illegitimate children have the same inheritance rights as legitimate children if paternity can be proven, which it has been. Eleanor is entitled to a share of my father's estate, which includes a significant portion of the Foundation's endowment. But more than that, she is entitled to the truth, to have her existence acknowledged, to have her mother's story told without shame or erasure." Thomas Chen, the CFO, cleared his throat, drawing attention. "If what you're saying is accurate, Julian, then we have a serious problem. The termination of that trust, if it was done improperly, constitutes embezzlement. The Foundation could face legal consequences. We could lose our non-profit status. This is not just a family matter anymore." "It is worse than that," Julian said, and now he pulled out the second set of documents, the ones Sarah Mitchell had provided. Because the termination of Elena's trust was not an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern. He distributed copies to each board member, and Elena watched their faces as they read, saw shock turn to disgust, saw professional courtesy dissolve into genuine anger. These documents show that over the past 7 years, Vivienne has been using Foundation funds for personal expenses. Luxury travel, shopping, entertainment, all charged to Foundation accounts and hidden in the general operating budget. We are looking at more than $2 million in misappropriated funds. And when employees discovered these irregularities and tried to report them, Vivienne systematically destroyed their careers. Sarah Mitchell's testimony is here, along with affidavits from 3 other former employees. All of them were threatened, blacklisted, or paid off to keep quiet about what they had seen. Vivienne turned this Foundation into her personal bank account, and she silenced anyone who tried to stop her. Vivienne stood now, her composure finally shattering, her voice rising with fury. "You have no idea what you are doing, Julian. I built this foundation. I turned it from Robert's vanity project into a real force for change. Every penny I spent was in service of that mission. Those trips, those expenses, they were necessary for maintaining relationships with donors, with partners, with people who could help us do more good in the world. Necessary?" Margaret Sullivan spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but cutting. $50,000 for a weekend in Paris was necessary? $100,000 for jewelry purchased from Cartier. You have been stealing from this foundation, Vivian, from an organization dedicated to helping people who have nothing. And you did it while sitting in that chair and lecturing the rest of us about integrity and mission. Vivian's face had gone white with rage, and when she spoke again, her voice was venomous. "You are all fools if you believe this girl and her manufactured evidence. She is a con artist, a nobody who saw an opportunity and took it. And Julian, you are the biggest fool of all. She has manipulated you, played on your loneliness, your desperate need to rebel against me. You think she cares about you? She cares about the money. That is all anyone ever cares about." Elena stood then, unable to remain silent any longer, and when she spoke, her voice carried across the room with a power that surprised even her. "You are right about one thing, Vivian. I do want the money. Not because I am greedy or because I need it to survive, but because it represents something more important than dollars. It represents acknowledgement. It represents justice. My mother worked herself to death trying to give me a future, and she did it believing she had somehow failed, that she was not worthy of the security she had been promised. You made her believe that. You made her feel small and ashamed and forgotten, and I will not let that stand. I will not let you erase her from history as if she never mattered. I came here with nothing but a letter and a belief that my mother had told me the truth, and what I found was a family built on lies, a fortune maintained by silencing anyone who threatened the perfect image. But I also found something I did not expect. I found a brother. I found Julian, a man brave enough to choose truth over comfort, family over image, justice over the easy path. And together, we are going to make sure that everyone knows what you have done, not just to me and my mother, but to every person you have hurt, every employee you have destroyed, every bit of integrity you have sacrificed to maintain your power. The room was electric now. Board members looking at each other, communicating in glances and subtle nods. Elena could see the shift happening, the balance of power tipping away from Vivian toward truth, toward accountability. David Rothstein, the philanthropist, spoke next, his voice grave. "Vivian, I have known you for 20 years. I have respected you, trusted you, defended you when others questioned your methods. But I cannot defend this. If even half of what has been presented here today is true, then you have betrayed everything this foundation stands for. And you have put all of us, every board member, every employee, every beneficiary we serve, at risk. I move that we suspend Vivian Ashford Hargrove from her position as trustee, effective immediately, pending a full independent audit of the foundation's finances and a thorough investigation of all allegations made here today." "I second that motion," Thomas Chen said immediately. "All in favor?" 10 hands went up. Only Vivian's remained down, along with one other board member who looked torn but ultimately abstained. "The motion carries," David said. "Vivian, you are suspended. You will surrender all access to foundation accounts, all keys and credentials, and you will not contact any employees or attempt to interfere with the investigation in any way. Do you understand?" Vivian looked around the table, seeing the faces that had once respected her now turned against her, and something broke inside her. The perfect composure, the elegant control, all of it shattered, and what remained was raw fury and disbelief. "You will regret this," she said, her voice shaking. "All of you. I made this foundation what it is. I gave it credibility, connections, power, and you are throwing it all away because of some girl with a sob story and a DNA test." She turned to Julian, and the look she gave him was pure venom. "And you. I raised you. I loved you when your own mother could not. I made you into the man you are today. And this is how you repay me? By believing her over me? By destroying everything I built?" Julian's voice when he spoke was quiet but absolute. "You did not love me, Vivian. You controlled me. You shaped me into what you wanted me to be. Someone who would never question you, never challenge you, never become strong enough to stand on his own. But Elena showed me something different. She showed me that family is not about control. It is about choosing to stand with someone even when it is hard, even when it costs you everything. And I choose her. I choose the truth. I choose to be better than what you made me. Vivian stared at him for a long moment, and Elena saw something like grief flicker across her face, quickly suppressed, quickly replaced with cold fury. Then she gathered her things, walked to the door with her head held high, and left without another word. The silence she left behind was profound. Board members sat stunned, processing what had just happened, the magnitude of the revelations, the implications for the Foundation's future. Finally, Margaret Sullivan spoke, her voice gentle. Elena, I want to apologize. On behalf of this board, on behalf of this foundation, for what was done to you and your mother. It was wrong. It was cruel. And we will do everything in our power to make it right. Elena felt tears threatening, but refused to let them fall. Not yet, not until this was truly over. Thank you. That means more than you know. The meeting continued for another hour, working out practical details. The audit would begin immediately. Elena would be recognized as a Hargrove heir and given a seat on the board if she wanted it. The trust would be reinstated with back payments and interest. And the foundation would issue a public statement acknowledging what had happened, apologizing, committing to transparency and accountability going forward. When it was finally done, when the board members had filed out, and Elena and Julian were alone in that vast room with the city stretched out below them, Eleanor felt the adrenaline that had been holding her together finally drain away. She sat down heavily, her hands shaking, and allowed herself to cry. Not sad tears, but the tears of someone who had carried a weight for so long that its absence felt almost painful. Julian sat beside her, closer than he usually allowed, and after a moment's hesitation, he took her hand again. The same gesture he had made the night before, but easier this time, less painful, as if his body was slowly learning that touch did not always mean danger. You did it, he said softly. You got justice for your mother. We did it, Elena corrected. I could not have done this without you. They sat in silence, holding hands like children seeking comfort, two people who had been alone for so long that connection felt both foreign and necessary. What happens now? Eleanor asked eventually. Julian considered the question. Now we rebuild. The foundation, the family, ourselves. We decide what we want the Hargrove legacy to be. Not secrets and silences and carefully maintained images, but something real, something honest. Elena looked at their joined hands, at the physical proof that Julian was changing, was healing, was allowing himself to be vulnerable in ways he had not been able to for 19 years. Can I tell you something? She said. When I came here, I hated the idea of being a Hargrove. I hated the name, the money, everything it represented. But now, knowing that I have a brother, knowing that I have family, real family, it does not feel like a burden anymore. It feels like a gift. Julian's eyes were bright with emotion he no longer tried to hide. I spent my whole life believing I was alone, that I had to be alone to be safe. But you showed me that isolation is not safety. It is just another kind of prison. And I do not want to live in a prison anymore. Then don't, Elena said simply. Choose something different. Choose connection. Choose family. Choose to let people in even when it scares you. Julian nodded. And Elena saw the decision forming in his eyes, the commitment to change, to grow, to become someone who could live in the world instead of just observing it from behind walls. The weeks that followed were intense and exhausting. The audit revealed even more financial impropriety than they had initially suspected. Vivian had been embezzling from the foundation for nearly a decade, using increasingly sophisticated methods to hide her theft. The total amount was close to $5 million, and while the foundation would survive the scandal, its reputation took a serious hit. Vivian herself disappeared from public life. No criminal charges were filed, part of a negotiated settlement that required her to repay everything she had taken and to resign from all positions of authority. She left New York entirely, relocating to a property she owned in the south of France, and Julian heard through lawyers that she had no intention of ever returning. He felt neither satisfaction nor grief at her departure, just a kind of tired relief that the battle was over, that he could finally stop fighting and start healing. Elena, meanwhile, found herself thrust into a world she had never imagined inhabiting. As a recognized Hargrove heir, she had access to resources and opportunities that had been unthinkable just months ago. But she used them carefully, thoughtfully, always with her mother's memory as her guide. She established a scholarship fund in Victoria Cortez's name, specifically for children of single mothers, for kids who came from nothing and needed someone to believe in them. She became an advocate for transparency in non-profit organizations, using her story to push for stronger oversight and accountability. And she took her seat on the foundation's board, bringing a perspective that had been missing. The voice of someone who understood what it meant to be overlooked, erased, forgotten. But more than any of that, she built a relationship with her brother. Real, genuine connection that grew stronger with each passing day. They had dinner together twice a week, sometimes in expensive restaurants, but more often in Julian's apartment, where he was slowly learning to be comfortable with another person in his space. They talked about everything and nothing, about their father and what they wished he had been, about their different childhoods and how they had shaped who they had become, about the future they were building together. And slowly, gradually, Julian began to change. He still did not like casual touch, probably never would, but he no longer flinched every time someone reached for him. He could shake hands without visible effort. He could accept a hug from Eleanor, brief and careful but real. He was learning that touch could be safe, that intimacy did not have to mean violation, that letting people close did not make him weak. 6 months after that fateful board meeting, Julian did something unprecedented. He attended a foundation event, a gala celebrating the scholarship fund Elena had created, and instead of maintaining his usual distance, standing alone by the windows while everyone else socialized, he moved through the crowd. He talked to donors, thanked volunteers, and when a young scholarship recipient, a girl no older than 15 with bright eyes and nervous energy, approached him to express her gratitude, he smiled at her. Really smiled, not the cold professional smile he usually deployed, but something warm and genuine. Elena watched from across the room, her heart swelling with pride and affection, and thought about her mother, about Victoria, who had died believing she had failed, believing her daughter would never have the opportunities she deserved. If only she could see this. If only she could know that her story had not ended in silence and obscurity, but in transformation and justice. As if sensing her thoughts, Julian found his way to her side, and they stood together watching the celebration unfold around them. "She would be proud of you," Julian said quietly. "Your mother. She would be proud of what you have accomplished, how you have honored her memory." "I hope so," Elena said, her voice thick with emotion. "I think about her every day, about what she sacrificed, what she endured, and I try to make choices that would make her proud." "You do. Every day you do." They stood in comfortable silence, and Elena marveled at how far they had both come. 6 months ago they had been strangers, adversaries even, brought together by secrets and lies and a shared father neither of them had fully understood. But now they were family, in the truest sense of the word. They had chosen each other, fought for each other, and in doing so, had become the family both of them had always needed. A year after Elena first walked into the Hargrove Tower, with nothing but a letter and a belief that her mother had told the truth, she stood in the gallery where Julian's father's portrait hung, and unveiled a new addition. A portrait of Victoria Cortez, painted from photographs, capturing her at 23, the age she had been when she met Robert, when she had fallen in love and believed in promises that would later be broken. The portrait showed a beautiful woman with dark hair and bright eyes, wearing a simple dress but carrying herself with unmistakable dignity, and next to her name, a small plaque that read Victoria Cortez, 1975-2022, beloved mother, survivor, and testament to the truth that every life matters. Every story deserves to be told. Julian stood beside Elena as they looked at the portrait, and after a moment he put his arm around her shoulders. It was the most prolonged physical contact they had ever shared, and Elena could feel how much it cost him, how he had to actively fight his instinct to pull away. But he did not pull away. He held his sister, and she leaned into him, and together they stood before the woman who had brought them together, the woman whose courage and dignity had ultimately changed both their lives. "Thank you for being brave," Julian said softly, "for coming here, for fighting, for refusing to accept the lies. You saved me, Elena. You gave me a reason to be more than what I was. You saved yourself," Elena corrected. "I just showed you that you could." They stayed there until the sun began to set, until the gallery filled with golden light that made the portraits glow, made the past feel present, made the impossible feel inevitable. And when they finally left, walking side by side through the tower that had once felt like a prison, but now felt like home, they left as more than just survivors of their father's legacy. They left as creators of something new, something honest, something built not on secrets and silence, but on truth and connection, and the kind of love that chooses itself, over and over, every single day. In the end, it was never really about the money, though the money mattered. It was never really about revenge, though justice was important. It was about two people, both damaged in different ways, both isolated by circumstances they had not chosen, who found each other in the ruins of a family built on lies and decided to build something better. Something real, something that honored the past while refusing to be imprisoned by it. Julian learned to touch again. Not casually, not easily, but genuinely. He learned that vulnerability was not weakness, and that letting people in did not mean losing yourself. He found peace not in isolation, but in connection. Elena found family. Not the fairy tale kind, not perfect or uncomplicated, but real family, the kind that shows up, that fights for you, that chooses you every single day. She found justice for her mother, and in doing so, found justice for herself. And together, they transformed the Hargrove legacy from something built on shame and secrecy into something that celebrated truth, honored stories that had been silenced, and gave voice to people who had been erased. The tower still stood, glass and steel reaching toward the sky, but it was no longer a fortress. It was a home, and the people inside it were no longer untouchable. They were human, flawed and healing, broken and whole, reaching for each other across the distances they had once maintained, building bridges where there had once been only walls. The battle had begun, and Elena Cortez was not backing down.